doesn't have theirs, call on her afterward. Okay, I think we're about ready to go, right? David Crumb is going to speak to us tonight on the 1959 Parma Sesquicentennial, 150 years. Take it away.
Thank you, John. Nice to be here tonight, and this is a whole new experience because we've got a screen up here and a screen over here, and I hope you can all see and hear. Everybody here okay? Yep. Okay, good. What is a sesquicentennial anyway? Well, back in '59, we'd never heard of such a thing. Kids were all saying in school, it must be a sexy centennial or something. Then we thought, well, anything 100 years old would be very sexy. And we looked it up in the dictionary, and it turned out that it was halfway between a centennial and a bicentennial. And it's Latin for, so sesquicentennial, that's what it is. Now, how many of you were here or can remember it? Could I see a show of hands? Let's count hands. See, 1, 2, 7, 13, 14. I got about 15. Is that about right? That's pretty good. That's 64 years ago or 63 years ago. And I'm glad you folks are here. There are two that we're hoping would come, and maybe they'll come a little bit later. So I'm trying to get adjusted to where I'm going to be reading my talking points here. We talked about most of this. Whatever a sesquicentennial is or was, the folks after it was over said it was the best celebration Parma ever had since the signing of the armistice after World War I. None of us remember that, but it was a big hoop-de-doo in Hilton at that time. They had a float with an effigy of the Kaiser hanging, bands all over the place. It was something I heard some of the old-timers talk about years ago. The planning took place a year before, in 1958, to prepare for this gala celebration. Next slide, Frank. So the organization, who sparked the idea for the sesquicentennial celebration? It was village historian Elizabeth Van Dorn Keller, I think, who was reading history up higher. Okay. And she realized Parma was going to be celebrating 150 years around 1959, and so she went to Chairman Judge Crook. Isn't that a great name? John Crook was our Justice of the Peace at the time, but he also became supervisor. He was a great guy, by the way, and really did a great job, and he thought it was a great idea, so that's when they put their muscle behind having this celebration. The honorary chairwoman was Grace Hillpfeifer, who was then the town historian. She was from Parma Corners. Eddie Burrett was co-chairman. Eleanor Aradine, co-chairwoman. Fred Jenigan, co-chairman. Shirley Cox Houston, just a budding historian in those days, was co-chairperson for publicity. And then William Waters, Bill Waters, he was another co-chair, and Arthur Kirchgessner was the secretary. Next slide, please. The program committee was Ed Burrett, chairman, Betty Keller, Village of Hilton historian, Eleanor Stoddard, and Vernon Pickett. And here we have a picture of Betty Keller in her period costume, Bill Newcomb, Bill's grandson's with us tonight, Pete McCann in the back, and all our favorite Judge Crook. They were the three ringleaders for this event, and everybody knew him and everybody got behind it. This is Ed Burrett and his family. And Ed's wife, Dottie, I believe was Danny Smith's aunt. And then there's Melanie, and I've forgotten what the other girl's name was. Okay, next slide. Parade marshals were Mr. and Mrs. Willis Dimmick. They were from up around Ridge Road and Parma Corners. And the exhibit committee was Miriam Colomer, chairman, Alice Roger, Wayne Wolfram, as an older gentleman, Dorothy Gable, Ed's mom, and myself. I got roped into this. And this is kind of where I got the bug, I guess, for history. It was a lot of fun, and these people were very encouraging. Yeah, I was a little kid at that time. I didn't know any better. Your nose was growing. Next slide. John Clock, Hilton Garden Club, Mrs. Charles Cooper, and her husband, of course, was the publisher of the Hilton Record back in those days. Next slide. Groups involved, the Main Street merchants. They cleared their windows. This is when we had a complete Main Street, and we had lots of storefronts, and they completely took all their merchandise out for a week and put all the old Parma artifacts in the windows. A lot of photographs and old pumps and all kinds of different primitives and things that came out of people's barns and attics. The Parma churches all got behind it. They had floats, you'll see them in a minute. Parma fraternal groups, the Rotary, the Masons, you name it, they were in on it. Hilton Central School, they got the kids going on it. And classes were writing what's a sesquicentennial, and go talk to your families and see if you can get some history, and it was going. And then the octogenarians club. Well, people over 80 were in high demand that year. They got organized, and a lot of interesting things came from them. The Hilton alumni living out of town, they got word. And now we have an alumni association that Nancy is chairing, and so maybe, when we do what comes after a bicentennial, well, no, 2026 is our bicentennial for the country, I think. I don't know if we'll be doing anything, but it's something to think about. Other clubs and organizations from the Parma community. Next slide, please. Event requirements. Men were required by law to wear beards. I have on my vest tonight here a permit, meaning I didn't have to, I had to pay $5 for it, but I wouldn't have to grow a beard, and I could be seen on Main Street, and this would get me off the hook. Every guy in town who, for professional reasons or personal reasons, didn't want to wear a beard had to buy one of these, or what would happen? They'd be arrested. And they would be put in the stocks and pillories around Main Street. You'll see some pictures of that coming out. If the constable caught someone, well, I just mentioned that, they go into the stocks. To avoid wearing a beard, we talked about that. Women had to wear sunbonnets and bustles on Main Street. And there are a couple of sunbonnets up here, and I think, Kathy, you just said that Grandma Cox used to make those for the people, is that right? I just learned something. There are two examples up here on the, well, yeah, one's laying down and one's on the hat stand. And on the first slide, you saw one. And Main Street shopkeepers, they were expected to be in appropriate attire while they're on their jobs, in the bank, in the post office. Even Grace Wilkins got into some sort of an outfit in the pleasure shop. And Nick and Kula over at the candy kitchen. So everybody was having fun. Okay, next slide. Event results. Judge John Crook thanked everybody in town of Parma for a superb effort in making such a memorable event. It was estimated 35,000 people attended the carnival. This is 1959. They really showed up. A lot of people from out of town. The weather was perfect. Young and old rose to the occasion. It was a day to remember. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're remembering it. So next slide. 20 units will march in the firemen's parade, and I think that was 20 firemen's units from other communities. This is High Burritt with a cigar and a beard. Clyde Robillard, who was our jeweler in town in the day, and he had a terrible experience after the fire because all the jewelry blew out of the jewelry store in 65 all over Main Street. It was not good. And there's Shorty Stoddard. He has a good beard. Next slide. Parade Day. That was Saturday, July 25th, 1959. Started at 1:30. Main Street was packed. Up and down West Avenue. There are a series of photos coming up here, and Jerry Pickett found a wonderful, on a 16mm film of the parade that Frank Pickett had taken. That had been laying dormant in a box for 50 years. Jerry got a hold of it. He had the expertise of putting on a DVD. He gave it to me, got it on my computer. thanks to Frank Hubble, we got it up here. And so Frank is going to show it to you. Hang in there. We have to do a couple of tricks here to make it happen. Here we go.
Coming around the corner of on the south. Oh, yes, yes. Where the light is. Yep.
Recognize anybody? There's a prisoner out there. Shelton. Now they're going down South Avenue. That's where the post office is. A couple of houses were there before. Anybody know that lady strolling across the... Time thing, time capsule. Thanks, Jerry, for making that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, the stagecoach passengers. You're about to see the stagecoach, which was the Hilton Fire Department, and it won first place, and rightfully so. The driver was Wally Kluth. The guard was Carl Schoen. Passengers, Bob Kelly, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Stone, Mrs. Carl Schoen, Mr. and Mrs. Les Fallon, Mrs. Steve Brody, Les Blodgett, and Richard Lauer. Anybody know some of those people? They're all familiar names. And there it is. There's the stagecoach with all the folks in it. It's a wonderful old vehicle. I wonder what happened to it. Does anybody know? Where is it today? Did they borrow it? I don't know. I'd love to find it. It'd be great to have it at the museum. But anyway, at least we've got pictures of it. Next slide. Okay, we're getting into some hot water here because John Adams was about 18 at the time, and he held the stage up with his gang. And he's here tonight, and he's going to tell us a little bit about just what happened there. He said it's kind of short, but anyway, here's the mic, John.
Somebody said there was going to be a stagecoach, and then somebody else said, well, there ought to be a holdup. So they asked me, who better to hold a stagecoach up than me? And so Bob Newsom and I held it up, and Wally handed down a box, which was an empty beer case. We made our getaway behind the gas station. Started our life of crime.
We're all learning at the same time tonight. That also shows you the front of Main Street, how Main Street was when it was a complete, intact Main Street. Everybody, that was our main centerpiece in the community. Everybody was there every day to get their mail or go to the pleasure shop or Nick's. Yes?
I wondered if that hat was the one I was wearing in that picture.
No, it wasn't.
No?
Because it's my hat. Just to prove it, it actually fits. It's too small, but this belonged to my grandfather, and so it's a beaver hat, and nice and smooth, and somehow survived.
Mine probably only cost a dime at the factory.
Okay, next slide. Okay, there's Main Street getting ready for the parade. That's a classic picture there. It shows the pharmacy, Orange Greens Pharmacy, later Bill's Wrinkles. The self-service supermarket, I think that was Buddingham's. Herb's Market, that was Herb Rutland. And the State Bank of Hill, there's a hardware store here. I think that was George Rowley or Corny Vanderbeck. Then the State Bank of Hill. That's not a real old building, it's a front put on the older building. So that the village was trying to make the Main Street look attractive, look kind of colonial and so forth. And then further down is McNall's, I think. McNall's, it now later became Homer Marple's. It used to be Mr. Michael's. And then Borelli's and the Pleasure Shop and so forth on the way down. But you can see the people are out there. It's a nice July day. Everything is looking good, and it was good. And the next slide. Okay, here's the firemen. I think that's fireman unit heading down. I don't know which one. Okay, next slide. Okay, here's one to talk about. Parma's longest married couple. That's Mr. and Mrs. Tom Erdyne, Lester Erdyne's parents. And Tom Erdyne is driving the car, the grandson. And Clarissa and Tom were married 67 years. That was a pretty long time back in those days. They lived down on Mariah Street. And they were both honored to be in the parade and had a lot of fun doing it. And so that was special. And you see the Sinclair station, that's where our 7-Eleven is today. Okay, next slide. Is there music on this one? I think that's the basketball. These are the Atchisons coming to Hilton. They were the first settlers down on Hill Road, and this is a takeoff on Bazile Atchison and his wife, I guess. But you might have heard the clomping of horses in the background. Did that come on okay? Okay. Next slide is the one of the old hose carts for the fire department. Next slide. There's music on this one. What is the prisoner from the sheriff's riding his horse? So, next slide.
Something's gonna happen to her, something's gonna happen. Just leave her alone.
Oh, this is special. Listen to the music and then I'll tell you about it. Well, back to this, we gotta go back to that one a second. Okay, that is the marriage of the two Baptist churches. At one time, there were two Baptist churches in town. The First Baptist on West Avenue, which is later became the Floyd Apartments, and then our Lake Avenue Baptist Church. About 1920, they said, what do we need two Baptist churches in town for? We're pretty much preaching the same thing, and so they decided to merge into the Lake Avenue Baptist Church. These are two members. The gentleman on the left is Frank Butcher, Butcher Road, and he used to sing in the choir of the Lake Avenue Baptist Church up until 59, I think. And then the lady there is not a lady. That's old Lloyd Burritt. Old High Burritt's father. And he was he loved to do weird and wonderful things. And he said they couldn't find one of the ladies in the Baptist church they were too shy to get up there, I guess. He said, well, listen, I'll do it. And somebody found it. He was a small guy, and they found a lady's wedding dress that would work for him. And B. Benedict is playing the organ, which is the original organ out of the old First Baptist Church. And Bob Benedict, her husband, was the leader of the choir, and he's playing the part of the minister. And the organ, you've probably seen it, is presently out at Tom Berger's funeral home. And when the Baptist Church didn't need it anymore, his grandfather, Avery Berger, bought the organ, ended up in his attic. I was one of the ones that had to go up and help get it down and dust it off and clean it up, and we got it working, and so B used it for the event. So there's a lot of good history in that particular picture there. A lot of fun. Next slide. This is St. Leo's. And I'm not sure what the theme was. There's something, I think Jesus and the little children.
I remember.
Yes. And next slide. Okay, here's another real interesting one. Anybody know that song? Should we all sing? That is the oldest resident in town, and her name is Mrs. Elsie Bulger. We had a little problem with that, as I recall, back in the day. They wanted to get the oldest citizen, and Elmer Miller thought he was the oldest. He was 97. But then we found Mrs. Bulger, but the problem was she lived on the wrong side of Manitou Road. She lived on the east side, but her heart was in Hilton anyway. But to make it technically correct, Judge Crook said because she is a lifelong member of the Parma Christian Church, which is in Parma, she is the oldest citizen. Well, Mrs. Bulger was a real smart old lady, and somebody asked her, how did you get to be 98? And she said, listen, I'll tell you. She said, I was one of 10 children, 9 brothers, and me. And she said, I knew how to take care of people. And that was her daughter, Corinne, holding the umbrella, and I think Mrs. Dwight Northrop sitting on her other side. I don't know who's driving and who the little fellow is there, but that got a lot of attention, and they all had a good time with it. It replicates a cobblestone church, which the Parma Christian Church once was a cobblestone church. And around 1890, they tore it down and built the one that we presently see there today. Next slide. Okay, here's another special one, and the guy in the dunce cap is here tonight, Pete McCann. He was 13 back then. And I don't know how you got into that particular part, Pete, but where there's smoke, there's fire, so.
I still got it.
What's
I
that?
still got it.
You still got the dunce cap? Well, I wish you brought it tonight.
I've been wearing it for 70 years.
It's the truth,
The
Pete.
guy in the top hat, and I think that top hat, is Len Wright. He was our history teacher back then. How many of you remember Len Wright? A lot of hands here. Yeah, both hands. He was a lot of fun.
Repeated that grade, huh?
So next slide, and there they are again. And this gives you the rear view. Pete and Len, and I don't know who, Pete, you remember the girl there?
I must have missed that one.
That was the Hilton Rotary Float. I think we got music on this one. Anybody know that song? Sailor's Hornpipe. They used to get the sailors to get them, they were in close quarters on the ship years ago, and to get them exercise, they get them out on the deck, and they'd play the fiddle or the flute and get them going just to get them some exercise. This is the Hilton Beach float. they really put a lot of effort into this. I remember I was supposed to ride on it, but for some reason didn't. And the mirror maid is Edie Badcock, Edie Manter Badcock. She was the daughter of Reverend George Manter of the Baptist Church. And she was a very attractive lady, and she was a perfect mirror maid. Jeannie Carnes from Shore Acres, and then Ron Buell is in the divers outfit, and ironically, Ron became a marine biologist in Texas with a very successful career. He used to dive out off Watoma to look at that old coal barge that had sunk off the shore of Watoma Beach, and always interested in what was going on underneath the water on Lake Ontario. Sherm Babcock and some other fellow in those old bathing suits, I think they came from Babcock's parents, or Sherm's parents, and I remember one of them ripped in the course of the parade, and I forget how it all turned out, but anyway, next slide. This is the best dressed couple. This is Don Toll and his wife and little boy, and they just looked great. He had a full red beard, and they got the first prize. Next slide. Okay, here's Reverend Hilton. George Hilton and his granddaughter came to town. Her name was Geraldine, oh my gosh, I've forgotten it. And my mother and she went to school together, and so they're there. My mother was hosting her that day down at Carnival, and 3 of his grandchildren came to town, and his daughter, and they'll show up in a few minutes here. Next slide. Okay, there's Mrs. Wallander, who's the daughter of Reverend Hilton. And with her is her old friend Jenny Mitchell, first high school graduate from Hilton High School, 1899. And they were just having a great time. And Mrs. Wallander came all the way from somewhere in Minnesota. But they really had a good time being included in this event. Next slide. Okay, the Hilton family was Mrs. Ernest Wallander, you just saw her. Mrs. Robert Tiffany, that's the one that was before her. Mrs. Bergstrom from St. Paul, W. Hamilton Niven of Grosse Pointe. We don't have pictures of them. Next slide. Okay, the parade is breaking up. You can see the State Bank of Hilton. This is a black and white. Ken Freeman loaned me some of his family pictures of the event, and you'll be seeing more of those as we move along here. Okay, next slide. This is an interesting one. This is the Hilton Baptist Church youth group back in the day with our chaperone, Dee Benedict, who never used to see anything that we did that was bad. She thought we were just wonderful kids. And looking back, well, I can tell you who they are. Some of you will remember them. Right down here is George Wright. Or no, not George, Doug Wright. That's Len Wright, the teacher's son. You just saw him on the parade float. Jack Tubbs, Michael Sauty, Karen Schmidt, Lynn McCarron, Carol Rankin, Patty Cunningham, Sally Michael, Mrs. Benedict, Nancy Behringer, Jane Harris, Doris Hadley, Sherry Markham, Diana Damschroeder, myself looking rather dangerous, Doug Clock, Jeannie Collimer, Donnie Wright, Debbie Dykeman, Helen Misma, Judy Collimer, Mike Hall, John Spear, and I think behind Nancy Behringer is Dick Pickett, and then Judy Anderson. So that was a group of the young people that were doing pageants and doing things in the church, and were quite involved that time in the event. Okay, next slide. This is the reception at the Baptist Church for the Hilton family. Reverend Hilton had been a Baptist minister, and this was his church, and they honored his descendants with this coffee in Traeger Hall. Betty Keller with her back to us, and Marie Michael, Sally Michael's mother, up there at the other end, serving tea and coffee. Okay. Okay, more of the parade breaking up. Some of these slides aren't quite in order, but I'm not sure that isn't Joe Bowles in shorts there. moving down towards South Avenue. Next slide. Okay, here's a familiar face, Betty Lacy. How many of you remember Betty Lacy and her? All of you, good. Betty and Herb, our attorney in town, and Jill, their daughter. Moving down South Avenue, and this is Felix McCluskey and his daughter Kathy riding a tandem bike. And can you go back to that slide a second? Yeah. Notice Felix has his feet on the ground and Kathy's doing all that. Okay. Next slide. And here's Ed Burritt and his family. He was again the chairman of the parade, and he, I'm not sure where he got his buggy, but they were all over the place. Next slide. There's Ed coming down West Avenue. This is a little out of order, but he's in front of the Methodist Church with the same buggy. Next slide. And now we're looking up. This is a very interesting shot. This is what you would see when you're looking up South Avenue. You see the old Curtis Block, later known as Ivison's, and then Fred Adams and Harold Tabor all had stores. Paul Rood was in that building. The Masonic Lodge was upstairs, all burned in 1965. Parade is now moving down South Avenue. Next slide. That's Vivian Odell. How many of you remember Vivian? Methodist Church, yes. She was down in front of her in-laws' house on Hazen Street. Next slide. That's Janice Freeman with a doll. That's Ken's sister, and she's coming down South Ave. And that's Frank Freeman, Ken's dad. He's driving a tractor pulling a float. I'm not sure what the float was, but
It's the Methodist Church's float.
Church. Ken, you know?
It was the Methodist Church's float.
Methodist Church, thank you. Okay, and I'm not sure what's going on here, just another antique car. Okay, you know who that is? Audrey Burritt. She got all dressed up and she never got arrested. She was right in step with everybody. Okay, next slide. Now we're down at the fireman's field, and you can see the crowd down there. They claimed over that weekend there were 35,000 people in town. It's amazing. Next slide. And there's our harvest queen that year. And she was going to be here tonight, but unfortunately she's not. We're disappointed. I hope everybody's okay. But that's Sherry Maggs Tabor. Look back to that slide just a second, Frank. Yep. And Sherry was our 1959 harvest queen, and a beauty. She was had lots of toys, and there's an interesting story. There was an alternate harvest queen, and I cannot recall her name, but she should have been there, but she'd been in a car accident and was in the hospital. And Eddie Burritt, the coordinator of everything, got a dozen roses and took them into the hospital and delivered them to this girl. He didn't forget about her. So there's an article on that. Next slide. And there's, anybody know that lady?
Oh, yeah.